All right, these are notes for G on completing the square. All right, a new process we're going to learn to solve quadratics. All right, let's start off by doing the warm-up. So go ahead and factor the following 3 problems. So go ahead and pause the video, factor the problems, and when you're done, start the video again. All right, hopefully you factored those 3 problems. So we want to know what multiplies to get 100 but adds to get negative 10. I'm sorry, negative 20. That would be negative 10 and negative 10. So this is going to factor to x minus 10 squared. All right, here we want to know what multiplies to give you 36 but adds to give you 12. So 6 and 6, so we're going to get x plus 6 squared. And then finally, what multiplies to give you 49 but adds to give you a negative 14, and that's negative 7 and negative 7. So x minus 7 squared. All right, notice, like I said, they have the same factor twice. Okay, so these are called perfect square trinomials. And that's going to be part of completing the square. We're going to make our problems have perfect square trinomials as part of them. So if you can't factor the quadratic, then we can use the process of completing the square. Completing the square is when we take an equation in standard form and turn it into an equation that looks like this. All right, you should notice that looks like vertex form, where we used H and K instead of D and E. Same sort of process. So, all right, first of all, we have to think about what is the formula for that C? How do we find C? All right, sorry for all the interruptions. I'm trying to record this after school, so all the announcements are being made. All right, so we need a formula. How do we find C? Well, let's go back in our video and look at those first couple of problems. What's the relationship between B and C for each one of these? Well, hopefully you see that half of B squared gives you C. So half of negative 20, which is negative 10 squared, gives you 100. Half of 12 is 6. 6 squared is 36. And half of negative 14 is negative 7 squared is 49. So a formula for finding C is equal to half of B squared. So if we do that to find our C, we're going to make perfect square trinomials, and that's our goal here in completing the square. So let's look at some examples of just finding C. So C is going to be half of B squared. So 5 squared, which is 25. So if I make C 25, when I go to factor this, what multiplies to give me 25 adds to give me 10, I get 5 and 5. So you see that I can factor this as x plus 5 squared. All right, let's look at the second one. I've got negative 12 squared, which is equal to negative 6 squared, which is 36. So if C is 36, what multiplies to give you 36 but adds to give you negative 12, we get negative 6 and negative 6. So x minus 6 squared. Notice this becomes my factor. Okay? So that's going to help us noticing that on something like the following, which is a little bit harder to factor. So if I've got negative 5 halves, so B doesn't have to be divisible by 2 squared, my C is going to be 25 fourths. Well, you're going to factor this is going to be x minus, this is going to become my factor, 5 halves squared. So like I said, this process will work even if your B is not divisible by 2. All right, let's go through that process. All right, so you got to be careful with this. To solve an equation using completing the square, you must remember one important rule, to keep the problem balanced. So whatever you add to the left side, you got to add to the right side. Okay, so keep that in mind because that's one mistake that people make. All right, step number 1, we want to move that 4 because we want to isolate our x square and x terms. So we're going to move the 4 over. So I'm going to have x squared minus 12x, leave yourself some space, negative 4. I'll tell you why you'll see why we're leaving that space here in a second. All right, step 2, we need to find C. Okay, find C. So let's see, let's do that. So x squared minus 12x plus half of b squared And whatever I add to the left side, I got to add to the right side. Half of b squared. All right, let's clean this up. You're going to get x squared minus 12x. Half of negative 12 is negative 6 squared is 36. So negative 4 plus 36. All right. Step 3, we're going to factor that left side. So factor. So here again, remember this is going to give me my factor, the previous up here, so this is going to be x minus 6 squared is equal to 31. Sorry, 32. All right, and then step 4 is going to be to square root and solve for x. All right, so square root both sides. Remember when we square root, we need a plus or minus square root of 32. And now we're going to solve for x. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus, all right, let's break down 32. That's 16 times 2, which is 4 square root of 2. So our two answers are 6 minus 4 square root of 2 and 6 plus 4 square root of 2. Okay, so we're just going to do like three more of these. Like I said, different situations that you're going to see. All right, so get you comfortable with using completing square. Completing square is an important process to learn. You're going to use it in your future math classes too. All right, so let's look at another one. All right, you got to be careful because you can only complete the square if the lead coefficient is 1. So that means we're going to have to add an extra step to this one because we need to take care of that lead coefficient not being 1 in this case. Now, not all of these are divisible by 4. All right, so I can't just divide everything by 4. So I'm still going to isolate first. So I'm going to get 4x squared plus 8x. Leave myself some space. All right. Now, before I find my c, I need to factor the GCF. Well, not necessarily the GCF. Let's change that wording because it's whatever my lead term is. So factor out lead coefficient because it might not always be the GCF. I'll show you an example of that in class. I believe we do an example of that. All right, so let's pull out that 4. So we're left with x squared plus 2x. Leave my space for my c equals negative 15. All right, now let's find c. All right, so it's going to be half of b squared. All right, now be careful because now look at what we're actually adding to both sides. We've got half of b squared, but this needs to be multiplied by 4. So over here on the right-hand side, it's going to be 4 times my c. All right, so be careful. That's another mistake that people make. They just want to add that 1 to both sides. But if you factor something out, you got to take into account how much you got to keep the equation balanced. All right, let's clean up. X squared, 2x, 1 squared is 1, equals negative 15 plus 4. All right, step 4 is going to be to factor. So 4 times x plus 1 squared equals negative 11. All right, now we need to solve. Solving for this factor. So step 5 is to solve. All right, so x plus 1 squared is equal to negative 11 fourths. Square root both sides. X plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of a negative 11 over the square root of 4. And then we just need to clean it up a little bit. All right, so let's move the 1 over, plus or minus. All right, square root of negative 11. 11 doesn't have any perfect squares, but we can pull the I out. And the square root of 4 is 2. So this one, like I said, if you were to graph this, it wouldn't touch the x-axis. It just has 2 imaginary solutions. Okay? All right, a couple more. Just want to show you all different kind of ways you can see this. All right, I notice here that I've got a lead coefficient, so that means this is going to have an extra step to it. I'm still going to isolate first. All right, factor out that negative 2. Find c. All right, make sure the equation is balanced. All right, let's clean that up. All right, let's factor. All right, now I need to solve for my isolated term, x minus 1 squared. So I'm going to divide by -2. All right, here, when I divide by -2, I don't want that negative in the denominator. So I'm going to pull that up top because a 3 divided by -2 is -2/3. You want that negative up top because it saves you a step later on in the problem. All right, let's square root both sides. So don't forget my plus or minus. Okay. All right, notice here, I've got a square root in the denominator. We're not allowed to have that, so I'm going to rationalize it as I go to clean it up, as I simplify. All right, what do I got? So I move my 1. All right, back to it, as I'm going to move my 1. And simplify. Okay, pull the I out. All right, now I've got the square root of -6, so this is going to be the square root of 6i over the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 2. So there's my best answer. All rationalized and all that good stuff. All right, let's try another one. If you want to stop, pause the video and try it yourself before I go through it, that's great. You can do that. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, I'm going to isolate. I don't have any Lie coefficient to worry with. I'm going to isolate. Okay, but I do have an odd, the 5 in the middle. 5 is b, so I'm going to have a fraction here. Don't change it to a decimal, leave it as a fraction. So when I go to find c, it's half of b squared. Balance my equations. All right. Now remember, this is my factor. So when I go to factor this, I'm going to get x plus 5 halves squared. All right. Now you can't change this to 2x plus 5. All right, because we didn't have a Lie coefficient to start off with a 2. You have to leave it like this. All right, on this side, I get -1 plus 25 fourths. So let's clean up a little bit, do that fraction. It's going to be 21 fourths. All right, square root both sides. I'm going to get plus or minus the square root of 21 over the square root of 4, which is 2. And then just solve for x. So move over the 5 halves. Plus or minus, no perfect squares in 21. So I'm going to leave it like that. So two irrational answers. Notice they're conjugates of each other. Okay, so hopefully it's enough to get you started on completing the square. We have one more topic we need to go over. We're going to talk about what changing into vertex form using this process. And that's how mainly you're going to use it in your future math classes. Okay, so this is asking us to change standard form into vertex form. Remember, vertex form look like this. Okay, so we're going to change into vertex form. You're going to use this a lot when you get to conics next year. All right, so it's not set equal to 0, so when I isolate, I'm going to move the 1 to go with the y. Leave myself some space. I still got to find that c. Okay, so you're still going to isolate step 1. All right, step 2 is still going to be fine, or in this case, because we have a Lie coefficient, we have to factor out the lead. All right, all about learning these processes. Okay, what do we got? Y minus 1 plus, leave myself some space, -2 x squared minus, plus 2 x plus some c. All right, so notice here, like I said, I'm not factoring out my GCF. I'm factoring out just the Lie coefficient because I've got to leave myself a trinomial with a Lie coefficient of 1. That's the whole point of this. All right, we're going to find c. Okay, so half of b squared, but this thing needs to be multiplied by -2, so over here it's -2 times half of b squared. All right, so next step is going to be to factor. So we're going to have, let's just clean up the side as we go. -1 minus 2 is equal to negative 2. Let's factor this, so it's going to be x plus 1 squared. All right, this is going to give me negative 3 times negative 2 times x plus 1 squared. And then remember, I want this to be vertex form, so I'm just going to move that 3 over and get plus 3. So now we want the vertex from this, so the vertex is negative 1, 3, and it has a of negative 2. All right, let's do one more of these, and you'll be done with your notes today. All right, so number 6. All right, I see that I have a lead coefficient of 1/2. All right, here's where I don't want to multiply through and get rid of my fraction. Okay, I need to leave that 1/2. You're just going to make more work for yourself. Now I want to change this into vertex form. So I'm going to isolate, leave myself some space. I'm going to factor out that lead of 1/2. So x squared plus 20x plus some c. All right, now we got to find c. Half of b squared. And over here I've got 1/2 times half of b squared. So like I said, if you factor out a lead, make sure you take that into account when you add it to the other side. All right, what do we got? So we got y plus 1 plus, all right, this is what 100, I'm sorry, it's 10 squared, which is 100, and half of 100 is 50. It's equal to 1/2 x squared plus 20x plus, like I said, it's 10. 10 squared is 100. Okay. All right, let's factor. I'm going to combine like terms first. We'll get 51 over here. 1/2. Let's factor that trinomial. X plus 10 squared. All right, and just move the 51. And it's in vertex form. So 1/2 x plus 10 squared minus 51. And then find your vertex. So my vertex is negative 10, negative 51. All right, so that's completing the square. So if you have any questions, please write them down so you remember to ask them in class as we go over the questions.